I used to believe that a quiet life was a happy life. Jake and I had been married for 15 years, and while things weren't perfect, they felt steady, comfortable. We'd met during my final year of college, and what started as a whirlwind romance gradually softened into something more dependable. Jake was my rock, the kind of man who brought me soup when I was sick and made Lily laugh until she cried. Lily, she's the best part of us. At 14, she's got her father's sharp wit and my stubborn streak. Watching her grow up has been my greatest joy, and, I suppose, the glue that's kept Jake and me together through the harder years. We built this life for her. A cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, filled with laughter, love, and the kind of stability I never had growing up. Rachel entered our lives not long after Lily was born. She moved into the house next door, a single woman with a magnetic energy that made you want to be around her. She and I became fast friends. Rachel had a way of making everything more fun, whether it was a simple dinner or a random Tuesday evening. She called me her soul sister, and I believed her. Jake liked her too, but who didn't? Rachel had that effect on people. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with just a smile. I loved having her in my life, and so did Lily. Aunt Rachel, Lily called her, and nickname Rachel wore proudly. Looking back, I wonder if the cracks were always there and I just didn't notice. Maybe it was easier not to. Jake had been distant lately, but I told myself it was stress. Work was piling up, and the demands of parenting a teenager can wear anyone down. When he started spending more time in the garage or glued to his phone, I thought he just needs his space. We all do sometimes. But there was something else, small things that didn't add up. His sudden need to work late more often. The way he seemed distracted during dinner, barely engaging in our conversations. And then there was the faint trace of Rachel's perfume on his shirt one evening. I laughed it off at the time. Rachel hugged everyone. It was just her way. But later that night, as I lay awake beside Jake, who was already snoring softly, the thought crept in. Why do I feel like I'm losing him? I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my comfortable life began to unravel. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to be suspicious of my husband. It wasn't like that. It started as small things, the kinds of things you ignore because they seem harmless, insignificant even. But over time, those small things add up. Jake's phone became one of those things. He'd always been open about it, leaving it on the kitchen counter or tossing it onto the couch without a second thought. But now, he carried it with him everywhere. To the bathroom, to the garage, even to bed, where he kept it face down on the nightstand. When I asked why, he brushed it off. Work emails, he said, his tone casual but clipped. Then there were the late nights. Jake had always been a homebody, someone who preferred quiet evenings over going out. But in recent months, he suddenly seemed to have a reason to stay late at work or grab a drink with colleagues I'd never heard of before. He'd text me to say he'd be late, but the explanations felt vague. Too vague. Rachel, of course, noticed my unease. She always did. One evening, after Lily had gone to her room to study, Rachel and I sat in the living room with a bottle of wine. She leaned in, her bright green eyes filled with concern. "You seem distracted lately," she said. "Everything okay with you and Jake?" I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. "He's just been distant," I admitted. "I don't know. Maybe it's work, or maybe it's just us. We've been married so long, you know. Things aren't what they used to be." Rachel reached over, squeezing my hand. "Hey, it happens. You two have been through so much together. Maybe you just need to spice things up a little. Plan a weekend away, just the two of you." Her advice was kind, well-meaning, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. If anything, her words made me feel guilty. Was I the problem? Had I let the spark fade? I promised myself I'd try harder, be more attentive, make time for Jake. But the effort seemed one-sided. I'd plan a nice dinner, and he'd cancel last minute. I'd suggest a date night, and he'd tell me he was too tired. Every rejection left me feeling smaller, like I was fading into the background of his life. It wasn't until the neighborhood barbecue that I felt the first real pang of doubt. I'd been tired that evening and decided to head home early, leaving Jake to enjoy the evening with our friends. Rachel had offered to walk him home later, and I didn't think twice about it. She was my best friend after all. When Jake finally came home, his face was flushed, his shirt untucked. He smelled like beer and Rachel's perfume. I teased him about having too much fun, and he laughed, brushing it off. But later, as I lay in bed beside him, the familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the air. And for the first time, I couldn't push the doubt away. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. A week after the barbecue, the unease settled into something sharper, harder to ignore. I've been cleaning the house, tried to keep myself busy while Jake was out running errands. Cleaning always helped me think. It gave me a sense of control when everything else felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I was dusting the nightstand when I noticed Jake's phone charger, tangled and slightly frayed. His phone wasn't there, of course. He'd taken it with him, as always. But the sight of the charger made my chest tighten. It wasn't the object itself. It was what it symbolized. Jake, who used to leave his phone lying around without a second thought, now guarded it like a secret. I told myself I was being paranoid. People change. Habits change. But the doubt wouldn't leave me alone. Later that evening, as Jake sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, I decided to test the waters. "Who are you texting?" I asked, keeping my tone light, almost playful. He looked up, startled, and for a split second, something flashed across his face. Guilt? Panic? I couldn't tell. "Just work stuff," he said quickly, turning the screen away from me. "You know how it is." I nodded, pretending to buy his excuse. But that tiny moment of hesitation stayed with me. Jake was a terrible liar. He always had been. The turning point came 2 days later, in the most ordinary of moments. I was in the kitchen making lunch when Lily wandered in, holding Jake's tablet. "Mom, do you know Dad's password?" she asked. "I need to check something for school, and it's locked." Jake's tablet. The one he rarely used anymore. My hands froze mid-chop, the knife hovering over the cutting board. "I think it's his birthday," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you try that?" Lily nodded and typed it in. The screen unlocked. "Got it? Thanks," she said, disappearing into the living room. I stood there for a long moment, my pulse racing. The tablet. It was a long shot, but what if? I waited until Lily had finished her homework and gone upstairs, then grabbed the tablet from the couch. My fingers trembled as I navigated to the Messages app. Most of it was innocuous, work emails, old family group chats, but then I saw it. A thread with Rachel's name at the top. I clicked on it. The first few messages seemed innocent enough. Jokes about the barbecue, a link to a funny video. But as I scrolled further, my stomach dropped. The tone shifted. Flirty comments, suggestive winks, and then, "I can't stop thinking about last night. You were amazing." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. I wanted to throw the tablet across the room, to smash it, to erase what I'd just seen, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was sit there, the truth staring back at me. Jake, my husband, Rachel, my best friend, everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set the tablet down on the coffee table. The words were seared into my mind, playing on a loop like some cruel joke. "I can't stop thinking about last night. You were amazing." My breath came in short, uneven bursts. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. Rachel, my best friend, the person I trusted with my secrets, my worries, my life. And Jake, the man I had shared everything with for the past 15 years. Together. Behind my back. I felt sick. I forced myself to scroll back up, my eyes scanning through the thread for more. The messages didn't leave much to interpretation. They talked about stolen moments, sneaking around, even plans to see each other again. I hated how familiar they sounded with each other, the easy intimacy in their words. Words that should have been meant for me. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not here. I needed to think. I needed to understand how this had happened. When had it started? Was it that night at the barbecue? Or had it been going on longer, months, years? How had I been so blind? Lily's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, and my heart clenched. She couldn't know. Not yet. This wasn't her burden to carry. Not until I figured out what to do. I grabbed the tablet and quickly logged out of the Messages app, my fingers moving automatically. I couldn't let Jake know I'd seen them. Not until I was ready to confront him. I set the tablet back where I found it and wiped at my face, taking a deep breath. That night, I lay awake beside Jake, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. His breathing was steady, his face calm, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I wished I could reach over and shake him awake, scream at him for what he'd done. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, silent and still, letting the weight of his betrayal sink in. My mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to, plans I wasn't ready to make. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Lily banging around in the kitchen, getting ready for school. Jake was already gone. He'd left a note on the counter, the way he always did when he left early. Meeting at 7. See you tonight. Love you. The words felt hollow, like reading the script of a stranger. I stared at the note for a long moment, debating whether I should rip it up or just leave it there. Instead, I folded it neatly and tucked it into the drawer next to the fridge, not ready to face what it meant. Not yet. I spent the day in a fog, replaying the messages in my mind. Every text, every word, every implication was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. But beneath the pain, anger began to simmer. How could they? How could she? Rachel had sat in my living room, drank my wine, laughed with my daughter. And Jake, he had looked me in the eyes, kissed me goodbye, and still found a way to betray me. By the time Jake came home that evening, the anger had bubbled just below the surface. I was standing in the kitchen when he walked in, his tie loosened, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He looked tired, but there was something else in his expression, something that made my stomach turn. Guilt. Hey, he said, dropping his bag by the door. How was your day? Fine, I replied, my voice cold, distant. I didn't turn to look at him, keeping my focus on the dish I was drying. I could feel him watching me, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. Emma. His voice was cautious now, unsure. Is something wrong? I set the dish down carefully, then turned to face him. Who is she, Jake? He froze, his hand halfway to the counter. What? Don't play dumb, I said, my voice shaking. Who is she? Or should I say, how long has it been going on with Rachel? The color drained from his face. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at me like a deer caught in headlights. And then finally he spoke. Emma, it's not what you think, he stammered. Don't you dare. I snapped, cutting him off. Don't you dare lie to me, Jake. I saw the messages. I know. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, his jaw tightening. It was a mistake, he said quietly. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to. A mistake? I repeated, my voice rising. A mistake is spilling coffee on the counter, Jake. A mistake is not screwing my best friend behind my back. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't. You didn't what? Think I'd find out? Think it would hurt me? What the hell were you thinking? He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt even more than the betrayal itself. Jake didn't have an answer. There was no excuse, no justification, no reason that could ever make this okay. I need space, I said finally, my voice breaking. Just go. Sleep in the guest room. I can't look at you right now. He nodded, his face a mask of shame, and left without another word. As soon as he was gone, the tears came, hot and unstoppable. I sank to the floor, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next day, I couldn't avoid Rachel any longer. She texted me mid-morning, asking if I wanted to grab coffee, like nothing had happened. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to confront her over the phone, to let my fury spill out in words she couldn't dodge. But I knew I needed to see her face. I needed to look her in the eye. I agreed to meet her at our usual spot, a cozy cafe just a few blocks from our neighborhood. As I walked in, Rachel was already there, waving at me from a corner table with her usual bright smile. It made me sick to my stomach. Hey you, she said as I sat down, her voice warm and familiar. You look like you've had a rough night. Everything okay? I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. How could she sit there, acting like nothing was wrong? How could she pretend to care about me after what she'd done? You tell me, I said, my voice cold. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? Don't play games, Rachel. I know about you and Jake. Her eyes widened for a moment, and then her expression shifted, half shock, half guilt. Emma, she paused, searching for words. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I snapped. So you weren't sneaking around with my husband? You weren't sending him messages about how you couldn't wait to see him again? She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the table. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry. I repeated, my voice rising. You're sorry? Rachel, you were supposed to be my best friend. My family. How could you do this to me? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the weight of her betrayal crushed any sympathy I might have had. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It was a mistake. It just got out of hand. Stop calling it a mistake, I said, my voice shaking. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday or saying the wrong thing. You made a choice, Rachel. Both of you did. And you didn't stop to think about me or Lily. You didn't care. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel an ounce of satisfaction. I wanted her to hurt the way I was hurting, but nothing could undo the damage she'd done. Nothing could fix the broken pieces of my life. I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly. Well, you did, I said, standing up. You've destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it. I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the cafe, my hands trembling, my chest tight. I didn't look back. As I got into my car, the weight of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. Rachel wasn't just my best friend. She was part of my life, my family. And now, she was gone. Just like Jake, she made a choice that shattered everything we had. I sat there in silence, staring at the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I wasn't just mourning my marriage. I was mourning the loss of the person I'd thought Rachel was. The person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. Now I didn't know who I could trust, and I wasn't sure I ever would again. That night, the house felt unbearably quiet. Jake was in the guest room, and the weight of his absence from our bed was both a relief and a reminder of how far things had unraveled. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to hear his voice. Every sound he made felt like a violation, a reminder of the lies and betrayal that had invaded every corner of our lives. Lily, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, was in her room, blasting music and chatting with her friends. I envied her innocence, her ability to laugh and feel carefree while my world was falling apart. But even her laughter, usually a source of comfort, felt like a cruel echo now. How could I protect her from this? How could I shield her from the truth when it was already starting to seep into every interaction? I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea in front of me. The tea had gone cold long ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My mind was racing, replaying every moment, every sign I'd ignored. The nights Jake had come home late, the way Rachel had avoided my gaze the past few weeks, the excuses, the perfume. Had I really been so blind? Or had I chosen not to see? The tablet was still in the living room where I'd left it, and the temptation to open it again was overwhelming. Maybe there were more messages, more evidence, more answers to the questions swirling in my mind. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear to read any more of their words, to see the intimacy they'd shared in black and white. Instead, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages. Rachel's name was still at the top, from when she'd texted me earlier. Are you okay? Please let me explain. Explain. As if there was anything left to explain. I closed the message without replying and set my phone down, my hands trembling. I didn't want her explanations. I didn't want her apologies. All I wanted was to go back to before the barbecue, before the messages, before I'd seen my life for what it truly was, a house of cards waiting to collapse. But there was no going back. And as I sat there in the silence, the weight of that truth settled over me like a shroud. I wasn't just mourning my marriage or my friendship. I was mourning the life I thought I had, and I had no idea how to move forward. The next morning started like any other. Lily came down to the kitchen, her hair in a messy ponytail, grabbing cereal and her school books without a second glance at me. I envied her normalcy. She was still blissfully unaware of the cracks in our family. Jake left early again, and I didn't stop him. I wasn't ready to have another conversation, not when I was barely holding myself together. Instead, I focused on Lily, pouring her juice and chatting with her about her plans for the day. It felt good to pretend, even for a moment, that things were fine. But the illusion shattered that afternoon. I was in the living room, folding laundry when Lily stormed in, her face flushed and her phone clutched tightly in her hand. My heart sank immediately. Something was wrong. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "What's going on with you and Dad?" I froze, the laundry slipping from my hands. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice steady, even though panic clawed at my chest. Her hands shook as she held up her phone. "This," she said. "I saw this on Dad's tablet when I borrowed it last night. It synced to my phone." I didn't mean to look, but her voice cracked. "What is this?" I stepped closer, taking the phone from her. My stomach twisted as I read the screen. It was one of the messages from Rachel, the one where she'd written, "I can't stop thinking about last night. Lily," I began, my voice soft but firm, "I need you to calm down." "Calm down?" she cried, her voice rising. "You want me to calm down? Aunt Rachel is texting Dad like she's... She couldn't even finish the sentence, her face crumpling as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Is it true? Is he cheating on you? With her?" I wanted to tell her it wasn't true, to shield her from the truth like I had been trying to shield myself. But I couldn't lie to her. She deserved honesty, even if it hurt. "I found out recently," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I didn't want you to know, not yet. I was trying to figure out how to handle it." Her eyes searched mine, wide with disbelief. "So it's true," she whispered. "Dad and Aunt Rachel." I nodded, tears slipping down my own cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Lily." She dropped onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. "I can't believe this. I trusted her. I trusted him. How could they do this to us?" I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms as she sobbed. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I don't know." Her shoulders shook, and her voice came out muffled. "What are you going to do, Mom? Are you leaving him?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I didn't know the answer yet. All I knew was that this moment, watching my daughter's innocence shatter, was the hardest thing I had ever faced. The days after Lily's discovery were some of the hardest I'd ever lived through. She avoided Jake entirely, refusing to be in the same room as him. When he tried to speak to her, she either ignored him or locked herself in her room. Her anger was palpable, cutting through the air like a knife. Jake, to his credit, didn't try to force a conversation. I could see the regret in his eyes every time he looked at her, the weight of his betrayal reflected back at him in her silence. But regret wasn't enough. It wouldn't undo the pain he'd caused, the trust he'd broken. Lily started spending more time out of the house, at friends' houses, at the library, anywhere but home. It hurt to see her retreat from the one place that was supposed to make her feel safe. But I understood. The walls of our house felt like they were closing in on all of us. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jake came into the kitchen where I was cleaning up. He stood by the counter, his hands stuffed into his pockets, looking as lost as I felt. "I need to talk to her," he said, his voice low. "I can't let this go on like this, Emma. She's my daughter." I paused, gripping the edge of the sink to steady myself. "You think she's ready to hear from you, Jake? After what she's seen? After what she knows?" "She has to hear my side," he said, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake, but I love her. I need her to know that." I turned to face him, my eyes hard. "Do you really think telling her how much you love her is enough to fix this? You didn't just hurt me, Jake. You broke her trust. And trust isn't something you can just patch up with words." He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping. "What am I supposed to do then? Just let her hate me?" I shook my head, my voice softening despite my anger. "She doesn't hate you. She's hurt. She's angry. And she has every right to be. You need to give her time, Jake. And you need to show her, not just tell her, that you're sorry." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "I know I've ruined everything," he said finally. But I'm not giving up on her. Or you. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. I don't know if there's anything left to save, Jake. Not with us. His silence was answer enough. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard Lily crying softly in her room. My heart broke all over again. I wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but I also knew she needed space to process what had happened. The bonds that had once held our family together felt irreparably shattered, and I didn't know if we'd ever be able to piece them back together. A few days later, I was in the garden, pulling weeds to distract myself from the chaos inside, when I heard Rachel's voice behind me. Emma. I froze, my hands tightening around the trowel. I hadn't spoken to her since the cafe, and part of me had hoped I never would again. Slowly, I turned to face her. She stood on the other side of the fence, her hands gripping the top rail, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice cold. I needed to talk to you, she said. Please, Emma, just hear me out. I stared at her for a long moment, debating whether to walk away or let her speak. Against my better judgment, I nodded. You have 2 minutes. She exhaled shakily, her grip on the fence tightening. I'm so sorry, Emma. I know that doesn't mean much right now, but I need you to know how much I regret everything. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake, and I would do anything to take it back. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and humorless. A mistake? That's what you keep calling it. Do you think that makes it better somehow? Do you think it erases what you did? Her eyes filled with tears. No, I don't. I don't know how I let it happen. It started out harmless, I swear. We were just talking, and then you decided to destroy my family, I said, cutting her off. You didn't just hurt me, Rachel. You hurt Lily. You hurt everyone who trusted you. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I hate myself for it. Good, I snapped. You should. The silence between us was heavy, the weight of her betrayal hanging in the air. She looked at me, her face crumpling as tears streamed down her cheeks. I just want to make it right, Emma. Tell me how. Please. I shook my head, the anger and pain surging inside me. You can't make this right, Rachel. Some things can't be fixed. You destroyed the trust we had, the friendship we shared. There's nothing left to save. Her shoulders slumped, and she wiped at her face. I'll leave you alone, she said finally, her voice trembling. But I hope one day you can forgive me. I wouldn't hold your breath, I said, turning back to my garden. I didn't watch her walk away. I didn't care where she went or what she did. All I cared about was putting one foot in front of the other, surviving the mess she and Jake had created. And as I knelt back down in the dirt, my hands trembling with anger, I realized something. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt free. Free from the illusion of who Rachel was. Free to start building something new, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. Lily didn't speak to Jake for days, and the tension in the house grew unbearable. She barely spoke to me either, except for short, clipped answers to basic questions. Her usual bright energy was gone, replaced by a cold, hard wall I couldn't seem to break through. One evening, after dinner, I found her in her room, furiously scribbling in her journal. I knocked lightly on the doorframe, and she looked up, her face a mix of sadness and anger. Hey, I said softly. Can we talk? She sighed and set her pen down. What's the point, Mom? Talking doesn't change anything. I stepped into the room, sitting on the edge of her bed. I know it doesn't, but I'm here, and I want to listen. I want to help you. She crossed her arms, her jaw tight. How could he do this to us? To you? And Aunt Rachel, how could she? Her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. I wish I had answers for you, but I don't. All I know is that what they did was wrong. And it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel hurt. She looked away, her fingers picking at the frayed edge of her comforter. I hate him, she whispered. I hate them both. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Lily, I said gently, you don't have to forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever. But hate, it eats away at you. It won't make you feel better. It'll just hurt you more. She shook her head, her voice rising. But how can I not hate him? He ruined everything, Mom. He ruined us? I pulled her into my arms, and for a moment, she resisted before finally breaking down. Her sobs were loud and raw, the kind of pain I couldn't fix, no matter how much I wanted to. All I could do was hold her, stroking her hair and letting her cry. When she finally calmed down, she pulled back, wiping at her red, tear-streaked face. "Are you going to leave him?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost timid. I hesitated. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But no matter what happens between your dad and me, I need you to know that I'm here for you. Always." She nodded, her eyes still full of hurt. "I don't think I can ever look at him the same way," she said. "Or her." "I understand," I said. "And that's okay. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one day at a time." She didn't say anything else, just leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. For the first time in days, I felt like I'd reached her, even if only a little. But I knew this was just the beginning of her healing process, and mine. The damage Jake and Rachel had done wasn't just to me. It was to our family, to Lily's sense of safety and trust. And I wasn't sure if we'd ever recover. But as I held my daughter close, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let their betrayal destroy her. Jake finally broke his silence one evening, catching me in the kitchen after Lily had gone to bed. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or desperation that had taken such a toll on him, but I didn't care. His pain didn't absolve him of anything. "Emma," he started, his voice hesitant, "can we talk?" I didn't stop chopping the vegetables in front of me. "I'm not sure what there is to say, Jake." He stepped closer but kept his distance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Or Lily's. But I can't just sit here and let everything fall apart without trying." I let out a bitter laugh, setting the knife down and turning to face him. "Trying? Now you want to try? Where was that effort before, Jake? Before you decided to throw away 15 years of marriage for?" My voice cracked, and I took a deep breath to steady myself. "For what?" "For Rachel." His face twisted with regret, his eyes pleading. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't looking for this to happen. It just had happened." "Stop saying that," I snapped, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? It just happened." Affairs don't just happen, Jake. You made a choice. Every single time, you made a choice to lie, to betray me, to betray Lily. He looked down, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I screwed up. I don't have an excuse. I was selfish, and I hurt you. I hurt Lily. But I love you, Emma. I love our family. I want to fix this." I stared at him, incredulous. "Fix this? Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. And Lily, she can barely look at you. She's devastated, Jake. How do you fix that?" He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. Please, Emma, don't give up on us." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "You gave up on us the moment you chose her. And now you want me to clean up the mess? To pick up the pieces of a life you destroyed? I'm not asking you to fix this alone," he said, his voice desperate. "I'm asking you to let me try. To let me prove to you that I can be better." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the idea that the life we'd built could be salvaged. But the other part of me, the part that felt the weight of his betrayal every time I looked at him, couldn't see a way forward. "I don't know, Jake," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, or if I even want to try." His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. But he nodded, stepping back. "I'll give you space. But I'm not giving up. Not on you, not on Lily, not on us." I didn't respond, turning back to the cutting board. The sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall felt like the only thing in my control. I could still hear Lily's earlier question echoing in my mind. "Are you going to leave him?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But Jake's plea only made the choice feel heavier. In the days that followed, Jake kept his distance. He didn't try to force conversations or seek me out for long, heavy talks. Instead, he busied himself with chores around the house, cleaning the gutters, fixing the leaky faucet, things that seemed less about necessity and more about trying to stay useful. I could feel his regret hanging in the air, but I wasn't ready to address it. Not yet. Lily, on the other hand, wasn't interested in subtle avoidance. Her anger toward Jake remained sharp and pointed. She wouldn't eat dinner at the same table as him, wouldn't speak to him unless absolutely necessary. She barely stayed home at all, her time now spent entirely at friends' houses or the library. Watching her pain, her anger, broke my heart more than anything else. One evening, after Lily had left to sleep over at a friend's, I found myself sitting in the backyard, staring at the stars. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that made you confront your thoughts whether you wanted to or not. I thought about the life Jake and I had built. The years of love, laughter, and struggles. There were good times, real ones, the kind that made you believe marriage was worth the work. But there were also the times I had ignored, the growing distance, the lack of intimacy, the way we had drifted into separate orbits. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped trying, stopped talking, stopped choosing each other. Rachel's betrayal was its own kind of wound. I trusted her implicitly, welcomed her into my home and my life. She knew the cracks in my marriage, the vulnerabilities I had tried to hide, and she exploited them. Maybe it wasn't calculated, maybe it wasn't malicious, but it was selfish in a way that shattered everything I thought I knew about her. But now, sitting there alone, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully admit. I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight of Jake's mistakes. Tired of trying to keep my family intact for Lily's sake. Tired of being the only one who seemed to sacrifice and compromise to keep things together. I wasn't sure what the future looked like, whether it meant trying to rebuild with Jake or walking away entirely. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The sound of the sliding door opening startled me. Jake stepped out onto the patio, hesitating when he saw me. "Mind if I sit?" he asked softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He sat down beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. "I miss this," he said after a long silence, his voice filled with a kind of wistful sadness. "Just being with you." I didn't respond, my gaze fixed on the stars. After a moment, I said, "I miss who we used to be." His head lowered, and for the first time in a long time, I saw tears in his eyes. "Me too," he whispered. "More than anything." The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside me, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage. "It's not that simple, Jake," I said. "You can't just miss something and expect it to come back." "I know," he said, "but I'm willing to fight for it. For us." I stood up, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. "You should have fought for us before you broke everything." I didn't wait for his reply. I walked back into the house, closing the door behind me. As I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where we used to sit together, I realized I wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. But for the first time, I felt like I was starting to find clarity. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to choose. And for now, that was enough. The days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house became a steady hum in the background of our lives. Jake tried to make amends in every way he could. Cooking dinner, fixing things around the house, and offering small, cautious gestures that showed he was trying. But they felt hollow to me, like a poorly bandaged wound that still bled underneath. Lily remained distant from him, and her questions about what I was going to do became less frequent, though the worry in her eyes never faded. She had started to ask if she could stay at her friends' houses more often, and I couldn't bring myself to say no. She was trying to cope in her own way, and I didn't blame her. One afternoon, as I sat at the dining table staring at a cup of coffee gone cold, my sister Megan called. She had a way of sensing when I needed her, even when I didn't reach out. "You sound tired," she said after I answered. Her voice was calm, but firm, the way it always was when she got straight to the point. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure if I could say the words out loud. But then, with a shaky breath, I told her everything. The affair, Rachel, Lily's pain, my uncertainty about what to do next. She listened quietly, letting me pour it all out until I had nothing left. "Emma," she said finally, her tone gentle, "you don't owe anyone forgiveness. Not Jake, not Rachel. But you owe yourself peace. And you owe Lily stability. You need to decide what kind of life you want moving forward. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. That evening, as I cleaned up the dishes after dinner, I realized she was right. I had been so consumed by the betrayal, by the anger and hurt, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I wanted. Not what Jake wanted, not what Lily needed, but what I wanted for myself. Later that night, I called Jake into the living room. He sat across from me, his shoulders tense, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've made a decision," I said, my voice steady. "I can't stay in this marriage." His face crumpled, the weight of my words sinking in immediately. "Emma, please," he said, his voice breaking. "We can work through this." "I can." "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "This isn't something we can fix, Jake. I've tried to see a way forward, but I can't. Too much has been broken. Too much has changed." Tears filled his eyes, and he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. "I hate it, but I understand. We'll figure out how to make this work for Lily," I continued. "She needs both of us, but she also needs stability. And I need to move on." For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The decision wasn't easy. It had torn me apart to get to this point, but it felt right. I wasn't choosing to walk away from 15 years lightly. I was choosing to protect myself, to protect Lily, and to give us both a chance at a better future. Jake nodded again, wiping at his face. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this easier for you and Lily," he said. "I'm so sorry, Emma, for everything." "I know," I said softly. "But sometimes sorry isn't enough." As I went to bed that night, the house felt different. Still heavy, still tinged with sadness, but also a little lighter. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, I felt like I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of difficult conversations, paperwork, and adjustments. Telling Lily about the decision to separate was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. She listened quietly at first, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. But then the questions came, rapid and raw. "Is it because of what he did?" "Because of her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I admitted. "But it's also because I need to take care of myself, Lily. This isn't the kind of marriage that's healthy for me, or for you." Her tears flowed freely, and I held her, whispering reassurances that we would get through this together, that she would always have both of us, even if we weren't under the same roof. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be for a long time, but she deserved the truth, and I wouldn't hide from it anymore. Jake moved out soon after. He rented a small apartment nearby, so he could stay close to Lily, and while our interactions were polite, they remained distant. He made an effort with Lily, more than he ever had before. Slowly, she began to let him in again, though the trust between them was fragile, built on cautious steps rather than the solid foundation they once had. As for Rachel, she was gone from my life. I didn't respond to her texts or answer her calls. I didn't need her apologies or explanations anymore. Letting her go was surprisingly easy. The person I thought she was didn't exist, and I had no room in my life for the version of her that remained. Life moved on, inch by inch. I found a new rhythm. Working, taking Lily to school, spending quiet evenings rediscovering who I was outside of being a wife. At first, the emptiness felt unbearable, like a hollow ache in my chest. But over time, I began to see it as something else, a blank slate. One night, Lily and I sat together on the couch, watching an old movie we both loved. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled, a real, genuine smile. "You're going to be okay, Mom," she said softly. I kissed the top of her head. "So are you." And I believed it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be ours to walk together. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer weighed down by betrayal or fear. I had made the hardest choice of my life, and now I was ready to move forward, not just for Lily, but for myself. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but maybe it was the beginning I needed.